Welcome to the You Are Loved Ministries podcast with Pam Baggett and me, Brenda Porch. Now, today our Bible study is going to focus on a man named Naaman. Now, this story is so incredible. It has so many twists and turns. But today we're just going to do part one. So don't worry. We'll do the other part later. But you'll have to come back for it because this is one story you want to hear to the all the way to the end. So, Pam, this man named Naaman, what do we know about him from the very first of his story found in 2 Kings?
Well, he was a proud man. He was in an important position, and he was recognized as a man of honor. He was a military leader in service to the king of Syria. And during this time period, Syria was very powerful and often merciless, and Israel was struggling with famine and other issues, pretty much at Syria's mercy. So 2 Kings 5 starts out by telling us about him. It says, "Now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but a leper."
A leper? How could he? Wait a minute. Leprosy was contagious, and you're considered unclean. And you can, why would they allow him to be such a leader if he were a leper? I mean, shouldn't he be living away from everybody else?
It would have been wise, and if he was in Israel, it would have happened that way. But leprosy in those days had no treatment or cure, and it is contagious. Naaman's career and family and health were all at risk.
Right.
God gave Israel the laws of Moses, though, and that protected them from many health risks, some of which destroyed ancient civilizations that didn't have the blessing of those laws. Now, in Israel, they had guidelines for recognizing leprosy early and rules about quarantining victims of it. But it's unlikely that Syria had the same rules and guidelines that Israel did. And if that's true, leprosy could have infected Naaman's troops and his family. And as his illness progressed, he wouldn't have been able to lead Syrian soldiers anymore.
So now you said he wasn't in Israel, but 2 Kings 5 said that he was an honorable man and the Lord gave the victory to him. So is this one of those situations where God let Syria spank Israel for some of the things they've been doing?
Mainly, I think it's God's usual routine of having a plan that involves a lot of elements that we don't get to see until the plan's over. So I'm thinking that's what it was, because Naaman's story was one that served God and served his people in a lot of ways. So maybe just put him in everything in position, set the pieces up on the board.
Well, I wish God would send us the rest of the story, because I have this terrible need to know. Yeah, actually, I don't, do I? I don't need to know.
There's want and there's need. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. All right. So this guy had a huge life-threatening problem. Now, here comes the hero of the story. And I just love the way God uses the most unexpected people in the most unexpected ways. So this time the hero, or should I say heroine, of the story is actually a little girl, or at least a young girl. But she's not just any young girl. She's actually a slave.
Mm-hmm. You're right. And we just said that Naaman was a powerful man living in Syria. And Syria was a country north of Israel. And in those days, it was stronger than Israel. And they often went on raids in Israel and brought back slaves to serve in their country. So Naaman's wife had this little slave girl from one of those raids. And that little girl had the answer to Naaman's problem.
Wow.
Let's look at verses 2 and 3 of chapter 5. "And the Syrians had gone out on raids and brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel. She waited on Naaman's wife. And then she said to her mistress, 'If only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, for he would heal him of his leprosy.'"
Wow. I mean, in my head, I can hear her sweet little voice saying, "If only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria." Now, that says to me a lot about this young lady. She wasn't evidently angry. She was a kidnap victim. And of course, we don't know how well she was treated or what age she was when she was, taken, but she was a slave. She had no power. And yet she is offering an answer. She's showing compassion to this man who is her master. and she's telling them about the prophet. Now, she had to at least be old enough to have some of that knowledge. I mean, if she had been taken at the age of 2 or 3 or something really young, she wouldn't have known any of that stuff. So in my mind, not only would she remember about what prophets could do and that there was a powerful one in Samaria, she would also remember her kidnapping. And that makes me curious as to how she could be that kind and caring towards someone who, at least on some level, was a part of the fact that she wasn't with her family.
Well, from my experience with children in foster care, most of them will remember the trauma of being taken from their homes and families.
Right.
Great detail. Even though they were being rescued from abuse, they can repress the bad memories in their original homes, but they remember police and social workers pulling them away from their families. 4 and 5-year-olds may even remember things that they or their families yelled as it happened. And as they're moved into new places, they may go over and over those bad memories at the old ones. They will imprint anything they want to remember. So a child stolen in a violent military action like this little girl, and taken to another country at that age or older, is very likely to spend a lot of time reviewing their memories. Their freedom may be gone, but what they hold in their mind and their heart is all they can control. But this victim had learned not only that there was a prophet of God, but she had learned to be compassionate and chose to offer compassion even to those keeping her from her home and family, which is probably where she learned how to be compassionate.
That is mind-boggling to me. I mean, it really is, that you have this young girl who was, as you said, probably taken in a very violent manner, and replays that in her head. We don't know how often, but I would think, as you said, it would be fairly often. And yet she was compassionate and caring about her master. So maybe that tells us a little bit about the master, or the relationship she had with the lady that she worked for, his wife, and him. Maybe there's a clue there, because if they were, I'm just guessing, we don't know, but if they had been terribly cruel, I wouldn't imagine that she would care that suffering. I don't know. Anyway, let's go on with the rest of the story.
And if they weren't kind, she might not have been allowed to speak anything about their lives. So there's a lot we can probably guess about it. Plus, knowing that he was known as a man of honor says a lot about how he might have received a suggestion like this. All right, he did.
Yeah, and then you said too that the scripture said that God gave him victory over Israel, and so God, he was an honorable man, and God was with him. So that, maybe if he had to be a slave, maybe that was the family he wanted to be a slave to. I don't know.
Well, let's see what happened next. Naaman acted really quickly when he heard about what the girl had said. Yeah. So in verses 4-7, and Naaman went in and told his master, who's the king of Syria, saying, "Thus and thus said the girl who is from the land of Israel." And the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. And then he brought this letter to the king of Israel, which said, "Now be advised when this letter comes to you that I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may heal him of his leprosy."
Okay.
The king of Israel was not happy when he got this letter. Verse 7 tells his reaction. And it happened when the king of Israel read the letter that he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and make alive, that this man sends a man to me to heal him of his leprosy? Therefore, please consider and see how he seeks a quarrel with me." Well, the Syrian king thought he was following royal protocols in contacting the king of Israel, but the king of Israel is suspicious and maybe stressed by the letter. He seems to have thought that the Syrian king was expecting him to take responsibility for healing the Syrian soldier, and he knew he couldn't do that. So he was probably also afraid that if Naaman wasn't healed, it might provoke an attack by Syria against Israel. That fear was justified, as the chapters immediately following Naaman's story would show. The king of Syria was powerful and brutal.
I'm sorry, but it says that Naaman told him that the girl said this and this, but then the letter, it's like, I'm going to send this guy to you, and I want you to heal him. And And I,
Get
you
up
know,
and
was
go.
listening to all the things that he brought, and I thought it was, I don't know, kind of weird. He brought 10 changes of clothes.
That would have been almost like a kind of richness. That was something that would have been a gift and some sort of I'm trying to find the right word. I'm not getting there. It would have been considered a normal gift to show honor and to show respect, and because probably nice clothing is hard to get.
Yeah, I just, I understand the gold and I understand the silver, but when we got to the part about the clothes, I'm like, okay, that must have been really special clothes. But now be advised, this letter says, when this letter comes to you, that I have sent Naaman, my servant, to you, that you may heal him of leprosy. and in my little sarcastic brain, I hear, dear King of Israel, you have magical powers and you've been hiding them from us. So we want you to heal this man of leprosy. And I'd consider it a big favor. Do me a solid and heal him, wink, wink, wink. Okay. And so then when the king of Syria got that, he's like, what are you talking about? Am I God that I can just heal somebody? And I'm thinking, if he were really listening, it sounds like the king of Israel wasn't really listening to what Naaman said, or he would have said, the letter would have been worded slightly differently. It would be like, we know you have a prophet. Can you send him to the prophet? It wouldn't be like, we're sending him to you so you can heal him. And so I could see how that would make him upset. I would be like, Houston, we have a problem.
Yeah. Well, the king of Syria has his own way of looking at things, and it's probably different than anybody else we would think of. But he probably did assume that a prophet who could heal was under King of Israel's jurisdiction and his rule, and like his magic men that we've heard before about kings having
Right.
magic people. So he just may make some assumptions about how things were done in Israel that were not made the way they were done in Syria. And he didn't catch on to the latch of the prophet will heal. That just never clicked. Anyway, Naaman wouldn't dare tell the king what to do or how to do it. This king was not the kind of leader that you correct about anything.
No.
He was tough stuff.
Right.
Elisha heard that the king of Israel was upset, so he sent a message to the king and told him to send Naaman to him. It's okay, bud, I've got you. Come on, send him to me. It's all right. In verse 8, he says, please let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. Naaman arrived at Elisha's with expectations, but things didn't happen the way he expected.
I think I know why that king's going to need more clothes. Because if every time he gets upset, he starts ripping his clothes, and you read that throughout scripture, it's like, they became really upset and they just started tearing their clothes. So, maybe he's like, they go through a lot of clothes if every time he gets upset, he starts ripping his clothes. I don't know. I'm looking at it from, 21st, 22nd century, whatever we're in, a U.S. citizen. And so, in my mind, I'm sarcastic and I find humor in things I probably shouldn't, but I just find the whole thing a little bit funny. First, 2 Kings 5, 9 through 14, verse 9 says, then Naaman went to his horse and chariot, and he stood at the door of Elisha's house. Now you're right. Elijah's trying to bail out the king. He heard that the king was really upset, that there was a guy that needed to be healed. And he said, send him to me. Like you said, I got your back. And so I can just imagine how Naaman must have felt going to Elisha's house. Finally, he was going to be healed. These trips that they take when you say went from Syria to Israel, that's not like a 30-minute car drive. Yeah. It was a journey. And then to get there to see the king and to have the king so upset and all of that. And so he's probably thinking, finally, this is it. I'm gonna get well, because, if the leprosy, even if they didn't have those laws about leprosy, as the leprosy grew, my understanding of leprosy is that it's incredibly painful and that you literally have body parts fall off, like they can lose fingers and toes. And
well, that mostly happens because they have no feelings in the nerves anymore. So we have things, we protect ourselves from certain injuries. I heard a story one time, a man who visited a leper colony in a third world country, and some of the children were coming and talking to him. He was trying to open a door, and it had a broken doorknob, so it was part of it stuck out, and the rest of it was really damaged. So it was hard to turn. And a little boy comes up and grins, says, "I'll do it for you," and grabbed the knob and turned it and opened the door. And they looked down and realized the child had just lost another piece of his hand because he didn't feel it. So he didn't know that he was endangering himself. But when we have nerve endings and they give us pain, there's a blessing in that keeps us from doing something more dangerous or damaging to ourselves. If we don't have that, we're at risk. So the body part falling off had to do more with them not feeling things enough to protect themselves from things that would harm their arms and legs.
But isn't leprosy painful?
I assume it is in some ways, but there's it's kind of like with neuropathy. I don't feel things that are touching the side of my foot. Okay. I don't feel what touches it, but I get a lot of aches and spasms inside the foot, and I feel those. So maybe it's that, I don't know.
So, I get it though. I think we've all been in a situation where we wanted something for a very long time, and then we think it's about to happen. And, I personally experienced something similar to that when in 2006, my family and I moved. We had been living in Mississippi, and we moved back to Florida. And, this was our home. This is where we grew up. This is where my husband was born. And we had just finally come back home. But there was a lot that had to happen. It was a very stressful year. My work had gotten stressful right before I left. And then we moved in with his parents, and we're trying to find a house. And it just, I felt like it was never going to happen. And I wanted it so badly. For a home is a woman's nest. And I needed a nest. His mother's great. She was very hospitable, but I just needed my own nest. And so finally, when we got into the home, I thought, yay, this is it. Things are going to get better. And then I started getting really sick with GI issues. And so my husband traveled with his job, and my kids were already out of the nest. And I would spend all week long, many weeks, curled up in bed, too sick to move, couldn't hardly eat anything. But every time I would think, okay, I know the doctor to go see. I'm going to go see the head of the GI department in this particular hospital in another city, and they're going to have the answer. Well, the answer he gave me put me in the hospital with bismuth poisoning for 3 days. It's got to be an infection, because every time I would go, they'd run all these tests, and it's like, you're fine, you're fine. I'm like, no, I'm not fine. I keep going in tachycardia, which is rapid heartbeat, and I'm in terrible pain when I try to eat. I'm not fine. And I had tested positive for salmonella. And so the minute they saw that, they're like, oh, you just have post-infectious IBS, and you just got to figure out what you can eat. Well, guess what? I couldn't eat anything. It didn't matter. And so, but every time I got ready to go to a new doctor, I just knew that this was it, finally. And this went on for years. I can't tell you the money that has been spent and the doctors that I've gone to see, local and out of state, and nobody seemed to have any answers. But I always get my hopes up. And so there's that excitement. So I can just imagine Naaman as he's traveling to Elijah's home thinking, it's going to be great. He's going to heal me. I'm going to get everything I've ever wanted, and it's going to be perfect. So I can understand that excitement. Pam, have you ever been in a situation like that where you really wanted an answer, but it just didn't seem to be coming?
Well, pretty often, actually. It seems God's timing rarely matches mine, but it always turns out to be better than mine. But there's been a lot of times when I just couldn't understand why the answer wasn't just dropping in my lap.
And, that's one thing I really admire about you is your patience.
Oh.
No, I'm serious, because you'll say, look at the 20-minute dissertation I did on I got to have it now. It's going to happen now. And you're like, well, sometimes God just doesn't meet my timeline. And I don't look at it that way. I'm banging at the door saying, Lord, please now.
I've done my banging time. Don't worry about it. And there are people in my life who would laugh so hard if you used the word patient to me about me. So there are others that know different things about me than you do. We'll get there eventually.
I think all of us, the ladies listening, can understand what it's like to really want something to happen badly, actually to need something to happen, and think that you are right there at the edge of it happening. So let's see what happens next.
Okay, verses 10 to 14. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be clean. But Naaman became furious and went away and said, Indeed, I said to myself, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and heal the leprosy. Are not the Abana and the Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. Okay. All I was able to learn about these 2 Syrian rivers is that they both ran down from mountains toward desert near the main city of Damascus. The Pharpar was known to be a very fast-moving river, which I believe would make it cleaner. Mm-hmm. The Jordan River ran north to south at the eastern border of Israel and was usually described as very muddy.
Oh, but he is mad. Now, I can empathize with Naaman. Not only was he excited to be standing at Elijah's door, but he already had it pictured in his mind exactly how it was going to go down. Elijah's going to come out. He's going to make a big deal, call on the name of the Lord, and he's going to wave his hand over the place, and it's going to be magically healed. And then Elijah doesn't even come out of his house, and he just says, "Go wash in the river." Yeah, I kind of get it. I get it. But like you said, God just does not do things our way. There's always a purpose. And like you said, it's always better, but he doesn't do things the way I, Brenda Porch, would like to see him do things sometimes. But he doesn't take orders from me.
Have you noticed that? Really? My problem is I can tell him what I want, but then when I start going into the how he should give it to me, I usually wind up disappointed. Like, man, we want to give God the request and the method of doing it.
Yeah, but here's the thing, okay? God created me this way, right? I mean, there are people in the world that are type A and there are type B. My husband is so laid back. He doesn't feel the need to figure out every little detail how God's going to do something. He's just okay to wait for it. And I'm like, Lord, why did you create me this way? Because it's not fun. It's not fun.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I don't know that. I'm the same way in a lot of ways. Maybe I don't come across the same type A as you. We have our own versions of it. But I was a supervisor of about 40 years. I was a parent for more than 30 and a teacher for over 50 now. The way I deal with all those functions involves a plan and lots of lists and a determination to see that everyone is on the page necessary to accomplish the plan. Most of my time is spent being disappointed, but that's the way it was.
Well, my mother used to say, we spend most of our life in plan B, but you've got to have a plan A before you can have a plan B. Okay. So I respected that idea, but when plan A didn't happen the way I thought it was going to happen, I had a tough time with that.
Yeah.
So I can see him getting upset.
I always prayed for patience, but I want it right now.
I know. And I heard a long time ago, if you pray for patience, God's going to give you trial, because that's the only way you get patience. Yes. So I stopped praying for patience a long time ago.
Yeah, there was one particular year that I knew I couldn't do that anymore. It was dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So is Naaman going to go wash in the river as he was told, or is he just going to pout and go back home because Elijah didn't do it the way he was supposed to do it, or at least how he thought he was supposed to do it? And so maybe Elijah will change his mind and come out. You just never know, because we're going to stop the story right here. And if you want to hear the rest of the story, you need to come back, because it's a pretty cool story. And we are only just beginning good with it. It's these Bible stories, every time we do them, Pam, every time we study scripture, it's like, okay, Lord, I hear you. It always applies to me big time.
True.
All right. Well, I'm going to move on to what we can learn from this half of the story, unless you had something you wanted to say before I jumped into it. Okay.
Dig in. Go on.
All right. Well, the first thing I see is that God has a purpose for your life. He has a purpose for my life. He has a purpose for your life. And when that little girl was a slave girl, and she probably thought that the purpose of her life was no more. She may have had an idea of what she was supposed to be. We don't know. But he used this little girl that was in a very unusual place. And sometimes God puts us in places that are unusual, maybe even places that we don't want to be. And I think Paul is a wonderful example of this, because wherever Paul went, he was going to preach about Jesus. If you threw him in jail, he was going to teach the jailer. If he found himself in the synagogue, he was going to teach them. If he found himself with Gentiles, he was going to teach them. No matter where he is or what he's doing, he is living out God's purpose in his life. And this little girl could have done the same thing. She could have just kept that information to herself, but she didn't. She worked out the purpose for God that God had for her life. And I really respect the fact that she could have allowed her circumstances to make her bitter, but she didn't. And what a powerful example of love and kindness this little girl is to all of us, hundreds and hundreds of years later, that we could see that she was, as you said, probably brutally kidnapped, and yet she was still showing the love of God. And that's pretty powerful for me. Mm-hmm. All right, the next thing that I see, good communication is key. The king of Syria, I think, should have done his homework before he sent that letter, because he made assumptions that just about cost two different countries to go to war. And that's true for all of us, for every situation I can think of. We look at other people and we make assumptions and we say, oh, well, I know why they're missing church. No, you don't. Not unless you talk to them, not unless you've looked into it. Or I know why they're acting the way they are. I know why their children are acting the way they are. There's a lady on social media that's talking about, forgot what she calls it. It's like children that get easily stimulated. And she's talking about how hard it is for the parents, because people will watch them interact with their children and not understand why they are as patient as they are. It's like, well, you just tell them they'll eat what you serve or you'll go hungry. And she said, no, they'll literally starve to death because it's not the right texture or smell, or the package is not right, or whatever. And so, when we look into other people's lives, we think we know, but we don't. And the only way you could change that is to have communication with them, to talk to them, not in a condescending, okay, young lady, why have you not been coming to church? But, I've noticed that you've been gone and I've missed you. Is there anything I can do to help you? Mm-hmm. Because, if Satan can get in amongst us and he can cause confusion and he can cause us to start judging one another, he can split a church and he can destroy a church. And so we can't allow our lack of communication with each other to cause division. Because as 1 Corinthians 14:33 says, God is not the author of confusion. Can't say the word. Author of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. So if it's confusion, if it's a stressful situation, it didn't come from God.
I like when you're talking about assumptions too, because we make assumptions, it's usually a negative. Mm-hmm. And we need to make sure that if we're going to assume something about what's going on with someone, it needs to be positive. Maybe we want to assume that they were doing something that was worthwhile or valuable that interfered with what we thought they should do. There's a lot of things. Yeah. I had, with the kids that I took in, they came from so many bad, difficult backgrounds, and they had so little training about what's right and wrong and what's good and bad, that I had to be careful and train 2 or 3 things at a time, but I had to be consistent. And whatever I'm doing to teach them this, I had to do it every time a certain way. And I don't know how many times well-meaning friends and strangers would give me their parenting advice on what I should do about that. And as soon as another parent starts telling you in front of a child what you should do with that child, they've destroyed a whole lot of your authority and your ability.
Oh, yeah.
But I'd have people to say, don't just let her off the hook this time. You don't have to punish, she was doing time out every time for that. And didn't understand that they were killing what I'd been building in terms of trust, because I was teaching that child trust because she was watching to see if I would do the same thing every time she did this. And they all do that. So these parents thought they knew, but they were dealing with children they'd been teaching from babyhood. And I was dealing with children who'd been taught otherwise. Wow. And there's a difference. So assumptions are a dangerous thing and they do mess us up. But I like when you were looking, the verse you quoted from Corinthians, some versions use the word chaos instead of confusion. And it means the same thing, but it kind of adds a level of intensity.
Yeah, no, I like chaos.
It's amazing how a tiny word can lead to that chaotic confusion. So many times we can read something too quickly and miss a little word that changes the meaning, or then we can let the misunderstood sentences lead us to make big mistakes.
Yeah, and if Elijah had not stepped in and asked for Naaman to be sent to him, there could have been big problems, because the communication wasn't there. The one king didn't fully understand what he was asking the other king, or what the protocol should have been, or what have you. But you were talking about kids. My mother used to say, "You're asking to be spanked, or you're asking to be disciplined." And her thing was, you need to know that line, whatever line we're talking about, is there, and it's going to be there every single time. And if it is wrong for you to, and that was a big thing of mine when I would talk to younger women. I try to explain, look, if it is okay to eat in the living room today, it needs to be okay to eat in the living room every day. Or if it's not okay, it needs to be not okay every day. That's that consistency that you're talking about, because the kids need that. And that's a key point of communication, is to say the same thing and back up what you say. So, okay, number 3, here's the hard one. God is not bound by our ideas. Now, I wrote it and I believe it, but I struggle with it because I have ideas. But
where'd you
anyway,
think that came from?
I know. So when we left our story, Naaman had just walked away angry because he had an idea in his head, exactly what Elijah was going to do, and it didn't go that way. And he's walking away at this point in the story. He is angry, and he went off. How did they say it? He wasn't stormed off. What was the phrasing?
In a rage.
So he turned and went away in a rage. And I think sometimes we do that with God. We have an idea of how things should be. And then when it doesn't work out that way, we become angry and our stubborn will kicks in, and we want to walk away from God. And that can go from, and I've seen it happen time and time again, where I prayed for a baby for all these years and never got a baby, so I don't want anything to do with God. Or I prayed for this loved one to be well, and God took them, so I don't want anything to do with God. But the bottom line for us as Christians, and Bible tells us that God's ways are so much higher than our ways. And so we may have an idea of how something should go, but as you said, doing it God's way is always better. And so, I really want to encourage all of us not to get those things in their head. I'm talking to myself, ladies, more than anybody else, that you have a certain way you got it pictured that it's supposed to happen. And if it doesn't happen that way, then you want to walk away in a rage. And I've seen that happen before, and it's heartbreaking, Because if we stay faithful, and isn't that what faith means anyway? That you don't know what's going to happen next. Then maybe it's not happening the way you thought. But to be a true child of God, humility is needed. It's required. And so a lot of times we have to put our stubborn will and our ideas aside, because if we get into a rage and we walk away from God, we are going to be missing so many blessings. So if Naaman walks away, and if he keeps walking away in a rage, he's not going to get the blessings from God, and neither will we. And that's something that I have to tell myself on a regular basis. God is not bound by our ideas. It can be very challenging, but it's still necessary to be pleasing to God.
I agree.
All right. Now, question is, are you going to come back and see if Naaman continues to walk away in a rage? If you know the story, don't tell the ending. We want to do it. But if you don't know the story, you want to make sure that you come back. And if you know the story, come back, because, we're always going to do silly things. So I thoroughly enjoy studying the Word of God. I've been in Bible studies before, and I think there are some people that believe that when you study the Word of God, and you do need to be reverent, and you do need to be humble. I mean, this is God's Word that we're dealing with. But it doesn't have to be stuffy and stoic. I think God sometimes looks down and laughs at me and shakes his head. Like,
sure he does.
Having it again. But we hope you ladies will come back. Pam, did you have anything else you wanted to say before we signed off for today?
No, I think we're doing good. We'll get to the next story.
All right. Well, we'll see you next time. Come back.